From baking the layers to making delicious fillings and frostings, all the way to decorating, storing, and serving, here are all my tips and tricks for how to make a mini cake. First, let's look at how to make a mini cake with cake or cupcakes. If you're using cupcakes, my recipes with 1 egg typically make 6 cupcakes, which will make 2, 3, or 4 mini cakes depending on how you use them. Unwrap the cupcakes if you bake them in wrappers, and then decide how tall you want your mini cake to be. If you cut the cupcakes in half across the middle, like this, you'll divide them into wider layers and smaller layers, which you can stack to make bigger and smaller mini cakes. Or if you use a bit too much batter in your cupcakes and they overflow like this, trim the bulges off and use only the bottom parts of the cupcakes. You can freeze leftover cupcakes in an airtight container like a Tupperware or a Ziploc bag for a month to use them another time. To make a mini cake with cake layers, it's even easier. I use a 6-inch cake layer for each mini cake, and my 1 egg recipes make 2 very thin 6-inch layers to make 2 mini cakes. Use a cookie cutter to cut out your mini layers. This cutter is 6 centimeters wide, about 2.5 inches. For level layers, trim them now, or you can trim the entire cake layer before you cut out the layers. This is my very vanilla recipe, which I used for the cupcakes too. This cookie cutter method will make neater looking mini cake layers, but you'll see that after frosting the mini cake you won't notice the difference between these and the cupcake layers. To fill and frost a mini cake, I'll show you lots of options, and for all of them I use my 4-minute buttercream. A small batch with 1 stick or half a cup of butter, and I actually prefer using a hand mixer because a stand mixer struggles to mix such small quantities of ingredients. This is icing sugar or powdered sugar. The microwave hack is really useful here because the consistency of buttercream can't be too stiff for a mini cake because you'll really struggle to spread and smooth it on. Scoop up 1/3 of the buttercream and microwave it for 10 seconds, and then stir this melted buttercream back into the rest. And as it mixes together, you'll feel it become much easier to stir, and it will look much smoother and softer. If your buttercream looks yellow, you can add a tiny bit of violet food coloring by dipping a toothpick into the bottle and then dragging that through the buttercream. The violet takes away the yellow tinge and makes the buttercream a much brighter white. You can add flavor to buttercream with freeze-dried strawberries crushed into a powder, or dulce de leche or caramel, or jam or lemon curd or melted chocolate. Any ingredient that isn't very runny will add lots of flavor without making the buttercream too runny. Now let's put everything together. I'll show you next how the steps are different if you use a filling that isn't buttercream, but if you are using buttercream as a filling for a mini cake, you can spread it straight on, like this. Or you can pipe it on, but the most important thing however you do the filling is to spread or pipe a bit of buttercream onto the middle of a cake board before pressing your first cake layer down onto it. Now you can move the board around and even flip it upside down and the cake will stay stuck in place. The buttercream will act as glue to attach the cake so it doesn't slide around as you frost and decorate it. The buttercream gets firmer when it's cold, so it gets even more secure, which you'll see in a minute. Now for fillings like dulce de leche or jam or lemon curd, which aren't as thick or stiff as buttercream, there's an extra step. You'll need a piping bag with a little piece cut off the end to make a hole about the width of a finger, and the easiest way to fill a piping bag is to fold it over a glass to hold it open. Spoon some buttercream into it, but don't fill it more than 3/4 full, or it will be difficult to grip and squeeze. Unfold the piping bag and pull it up out of the glass, and then twist it to push down on the buttercream so it's tight. After attaching your cake to the cake board with that dot of buttercream, squeeze the piping bag to make a ring of buttercream around each cake layer, called a buttercream dam, which acts as a wall to hold runny fillings in. Spoon your filling in and continue layering the cake, and this way the weight of the upper layers will be held up by the buttercream, so the filling won't ooze out from between the cake layers and cause bulges in the frosting on the sides of the cake. Next, very important, put your assembled mini cake into the fridge for 30 minutes or the freezer for 15 minutes to chill before you frost it. To frost a mini cake, the first layer is called a crumb coat, and it's just what it sounds like, a coat of buttercream to trap any crumbs that come off the cake. You can spread this on or pipe it. I prefer piping for mini cakes because it means there's less friction between your offset spatula or angled palette knife when you're spreading the frosting, since the piped buttercream is already attached to the cake. Notice that I'm pressing down on the cake board as I spread, and that's because mini cakes are so lightweight that the pressure as you spread can push the cake board around on the turntable even with a non-slip mat underneath like I have here, so pressing down on the cake board as you spread will hold it still. This is a cake comb or icing scraper or frosting smoother, and by pressing the bottom edge down on the cake board, you'll line it up straight as you scrape around the cake to smooth the buttercream. You can press down on the cake board with your other hand to hold it still. This crumb coat doesn't need to be perfect, but if you're using cookie cutter layers, you'll notice the neat straight sides, which look very different on a mini cake made with cupcake layers, and I'll show you in a moment why that doesn't matter. To flatten the top edge, swipe sideways and then scrape the buttercream from your offset spatula into a little bowl, since this will have crumbs in it, so you don't want to scrape it back into your main bowl of buttercream. I want to show you quickly that if you're using cupcakes as the layers for your mini cake, you won't have a neat, straight outline yet, but that's going to be covered up with frosting soon, so although you could trim the cupcake layers to make the sides straight, it's an extra step that I wouldn't say is necessary unless you're making mini cakes for a very formal occasion and you want a perfect cross-section when you cut into each one. I usually use white for my crumb coat to avoid any colouring bleeding into the cake layers, and then I tint the leftover buttercream to be whatever colour I want for my final coat of frosting. The cake needs to go back into the fridge or freezer for 15 to 30 minutes to set the crumb coat, and meanwhile, check the consistency of the buttercream for your final coat. It should be easy to stir and smooth, like this. When the crumb coat has set and it's firm, not sticky, spoon some buttercream onto the top and spread it to cover the top and stick out over the edges, to make sharp edges from the sides to the top of the cake later. Spin the cake while holding your offset spatula at a 45-degree angle to smooth and flatten the top, and then spread buttercream around the sides. Notice that I'm pushing the buttercream up to form a wall or lip around the top of the cake, which is also to make a neat top edge later. You'll need to scrape several times to get the frosting smooth, using very, very light pressure against the cake because pushing too hard against it can dislodge it from that dot of buttercream at the bottom, the one you spread or piped onto the middle of the cake board before layering the cake. As you spin the cake, your cake comb will scrape off the excess buttercream from the cake and drag it around the cake. And especially for mini cakes, keep an eye on your cake comb and swipe the cake comb away before you get too much build-up on it, because that build-up of buttercream will put pressure on the cake and that can also dislodge it from the dot of buttercream. After a few scrapes, spread more buttercream to fill in any indents or gaps in the frosting, where it's shallower than on the rest of the cake, and then scrape again. To get the frosting super smooth, I like to use a metal cake comb instead of a plastic one, because the straight edge of a plastic comb gets dinged really easily when you wash or drop it, whereas metal is much stronger and will stay smooth for longer. You can warm up the edge of a metal comb with hot water or a hairdryer or a blowtorch, and the warm metal will get your frosting even smoother. Tidy up the top edge of the cake by swiping sideways with your offset spatula, and by spreading the buttercream onto the top of the cake so generously at the beginning, and spreading that lip or wall of buttercream up around the top of the sides, you'll make a neat straight edge around the top of the cake now. Make sure you wipe the blade clean on a towel or paper towel after each swipe, so you don't drag dregs of buttercream back onto the top of the cake. Okay, decorations. To pipe onto a mini cake, it's best to chill the cake first so that the frosting sets. Otherwise, the weight of the piping can cause the frosting to sink or droop or bulge. Choose a small piping tip so your piping doesn't dwarf your cake. You'll only need a small amount of buttercream for a mini cake compared to a larger cake, but it's best to fill the piping bag up at least a third full to make it easier to grip the bag and squeeze the buttercream out, which will make your piping neater. As well as borders around the top and bottom of the cake, you can pipe onto the sides of a mini cake. Again, choose a small piping tip, like this number 16 star tip, so that the decorations are in proportion to the cake. Stencils are a quick way to add neat designs to mini cakes. Buy cake stencils or make your own by drawing shapes onto parchment or wax paper and cutting them out. The buttercream frosting has to be cold and firm for stenciling, so that the stencil doesn't leave texture behind on the frosting when you peel it away. Messages can be tricky on mini cakes because you have such a small space for the letters. Sweet stamp letters are a great option. You can buy them in cupcake-sized sets, which are perfect for mini cakes. Chill the cake for an hour first, and then leave it out at room temperature for 30 minutes, so that the frosting is firm but not cold. And this will give you the neatest results. You can paint into the imprints using edible paints, or make your own by mixing edible gold or silver luster dust with vodka, or a clear flavour extract, like clear vanilla or lemon. Buttercream transfers are one of my favourite ways to decorate cakes, and they're really useful for mini cakes where the details have to be so tiny. Pipe a design onto parchment or wax paper, or microwave the buttercream for about 5 seconds to soften it, and then you can brush it onto the paper. The piece of paper should be as small as possible, just bigger than the design, so that it can be transferred onto the cake without the excess paper getting in the way. Press the design gently against the cake and then put it into the fridge for 30 minutes to an hour. Then peel the paper off to leave the design on the cake. You can store mini cakes in a Tupperware or a sealed box in the fridge for a few days. It's best to transport them straight from the fridge while they're still cold because they'll withstand car vibrations and movements much better than when they're at room temperature. If you want to transfer a mini cake from its cake board onto a plate or platter or cake stand, do that when it's cold too, so that you don't damage the frosting or the decorations. Cakes taste best when they're at room temperature, when the cake and filling and frosting are soft, not cold and hard. So let them sit at room temperature for an hour or two before you serve them. This way they'll taste the best. You could cut a mini cake into tiny slices, but they're so tiny you can eat them with a fork, and they're the perfect size for an individual portion or for a couple to share. I hope this tutorial has been useful. Visit my cake school on BritishGirlBakes.com for online courses to learn hundreds of cake decorating techniques and designs. And start a free 7-day trial of my all-you-can-cake membership for access to everything on my cake school, so you can try it out risk-free. See you there!